There's a moment when someone decides to break you in public. They choose their words like weapons, their timing like a surgeon, their audience like a theater director. They think they've cornered you. They believe they've found your weakness. They assume you'll crumble, explain, or retreat. But Machiavelli would tell you something different. The man who gets humiliated and reacts emotionally has already lost twice. Once to the attack, and once to his own response. Most people think humiliation is about what was said. It isn't. It's about what happens next. Because in that split second after the words land, you have a choice. You can play the victim they expect you to be, or you can become the predator they never saw coming. The difference between these two outcomes isn't luck. It's strategy. When someone humiliates you publicly, they're not just attacking your reputation. They're testing your psychological architecture. They want to see if you'll collapse under pressure, if you'll reveal the emotional weak points they can exploit later, if you'll give them the satisfaction of watching you squirm. But here's what they don't expect: complete emotional neutrality in the face of their aggression. Machiavelli understood that power isn't about never being attacked. It's about never looking wounded when you are. The moment you flinch, explain, or rush to defend yourself, you validate their frame. You accept that their opinion matters. You signal that their words have authority over your emotional state. And that's exactly what they wanted. Confirmation that they can move you. So what's the first rule? Never defend yourself immediately. Defense is admission of guilt in the court of public opinion. When someone throws a verbal blade at you, don't catch it. Let it hit the ground. Let the silence do something they never prepared for. Let it make them uncomfortable, because while they expected reaction, you're giving them calculation. While they wanted emotion, you're showing them ice. Here's what this looks like in practice. Someone says something designed to embarrass you in front of others. Maybe they mock your appearance, your past failures, your ambitions. The room waits for your response. Everyone's watching. This is your moment of choice. You don't speak immediately. You hold eye contact. You let the silence stretch until it becomes uncomfortable for everyone except you. Then, when you finally speak, you don't address their insult. You address their need to give it. Interesting that you felt you needed to say that. That's it. You're not defending the content. You're questioning the motive. You're not explaining why they're wrong. You're making everyone wonder why they needed to be right. You've changed the frame from, "Is he weak?" to "Why is she so aggressive?" And in that change, you've already won. But this is just the beginning. Because the real power move isn't surviving the humiliation. It's making them regret attempting it. Machiavelli knew that the best revenge isn't immediate retaliation. It's making your opponent defeat themselves through their own actions. And people who humiliate others publicly almost always overplay their hand if you give them enough rope. Here's the psychological truth they don't teach you. People who attack others in public are usually performing for the crowd, not for you. They want validation from the audience. They want to be seen as clever, dominant, untouchable. But that need for applause is also their weakness, because performers need reactions to feel successful. And when you don't give them the reaction they scripted, they often push harder. They escalate. They reveal more of their desperation. And that's when the crowd starts to turn. Watch what happens when you respond to humiliation with cold curiosity instead of hot emotion. You seem really invested in my failures. Is there something I should know? You're not angry. You're not hurt. You're genuinely puzzled by their behavior. And that confusion, that lack of emotional engagement, it unsettles them more than any insult could, because now they have to explain themselves. Now they're the one on trial. The crowd, who moments ago was laughing at your expense, suddenly becomes uncomfortable. They start to see the attack differently. What seemed clever now looks cruel. What felt justified now feels excessive. And the person who tried to humiliate you begins to look like the one with the problem. That's the psychological reversal Machiavelli mastered. He never fought force with force. He redirected energy until his enemies destroyed themselves. But what if the humiliation is about something true? What if they're mocking a real failure, a genuine weakness, an undeniable flaw? This is where most people panic. They think acknowledgement equals defeat. But Machiavelli would disagree. He knew that the man who owns his imperfections can't be blackmailed by them. When you accept a criticism calmly, you drain it of its power to hurt you. You're right. That didn't go well. And yet here I am. You're not denying the failure. You're contextualizing it. You're showing that you're bigger than your mistakes. You're demonstrating that their attempt to shame you only reveals your ability to survive shame. And survival, especially public survival, is intimidating to people who expected you to hide. This is where the psychology gets lethal. When someone tries to humiliate you and you remain unmoved, you force them to confront an uncomfortable reality. You're not as fragile as they thought. You're not as easy to manipulate as they hoped. You're not playing by the emotional rules they depend on. And that makes you dangerous in their eyes. Because if you can't be controlled through shame, what else can't they control about you? The smartest move after deflecting humiliation isn't to continue the conversation. It's to withdraw your attention entirely. Not in anger, not in hurt, but in boredom. You've assessed their attack, found it unworthy of further engagement, and moved on to something more interesting. This dismissal, this casual change of focus, it hits harder than any comeback could, because you've essentially said, "You're not worth my emotional energy." And here's what happens next. The person who tried to humiliate you will often try again. But now they're operating from a position of weakness. They've revealed that they need your reaction to feel powerful. They've shown that your approval or disapproval matters to them more than they want to admit. They've exposed their emotional dependency on your response, and that dependency becomes your leverage. Machiavelli would tell you to file this information away. Remember who needs to diminish others to feel strong. Remember who can't resist the temptation to attack when they think no one is watching their motives. Remember who shows their true character when they believe they have social permission to be cruel. Because these people will reveal themselves again. And next time, you'll be ready not just to deflect, but to dismantle. The long-term strategy isn't about winning individual moments of conflict. It's about building a reputation as someone who can't be shaken, someone who doesn't flinch under pressure, someone who treats attacks like weather, noticed, but not internalized. When you consistently respond to humiliation with calm analysis instead of emotional reaction, people stop trying to humiliate you. Not because they respect you, but because they fear the unpredictability of your responses. This reputation becomes your armor. People start to hesitate before attacking you because they can't predict how you'll respond. They worry that their insult will backfire. They fear that you'll make them look foolish without even trying. And that fear, that hesitation, that's where your power lives, in the space between their impulse to attack and their decision to stay silent. But let's get more specific about how this works in real situations. Say you're in a meeting and someone undermines your idea publicly. That's interesting, but didn't something similar fail last quarter? They've just tried to make you look incompetent in front of your colleagues. The average person might get defensive, start explaining why this is different, or try to justify their thinking. But that's exactly what the attacker wants. They want you scrambling to defend yourself. Instead, you pause. You let the words hang in the air for a moment. Then you respond with calculated precision. I appreciate you bringing up the past. It shows you're paying attention to my work. You haven't denied the failure. You haven't gotten defensive. You've reframed their attack as evidence of their focus on you. Now they look obsessed rather than insightful. Or imagine you're at a social gathering and someone makes a joke at your expense. Look who decided to show up. Hope you're better at conversation than you were at that presentation last week. The room chuckles, waiting for your reaction. You could laugh it off, make a self-deprecating joke, or fire back with an insult. But Machiavelli would choose none of these options. You smile slightly, not embarrassed but amused. You remembered that presentation? I'm flattered by the attention. You've just turned their mockery into evidence of their interest in you. You've made them look like someone who thinks about you more than they probably should. And you've done it without breaking character, without getting emotional, without sinking to their level. The key to these responses is that they reveal something uncomfortable about the attacker while keeping you clean. You're not insulting them back. You're not getting defensive. You're simply holding up a mirror to their behavior and letting everyone see what's really happening. The person who tried to humiliate you is now exposed as someone who's been watching you, thinking about you, waiting for an opportunity to strike. And that makes them look petty, not powerful. But what about when the humiliation is more subtle? Not everyone attacks with obvious insults. Some people use what Machiavelli would call the velvet knife, compliments that cut, questions that corner, observations that sting. You're so brave to wear that. I love how you don't care what people think about your hair. It's refreshing to meet someone so comfortable with being different. These attacks are harder to respond to because they are disguised as kindness. But the same principles apply. You don't take the bait, you don't explain yourself, you turn the observation back on them. That's an interesting thing to notice, you might say. Or, you seem to think a lot about appearance. You're not defensive, but you're not grateful either. You're curious about why they felt compelled to comment. The person who gives backhanded compliments is trying to make you feel grateful for their attention, while simultaneously making you feel inadequate. But when you respond with calm interest in their motives rather than appreciation for their words, you disrupt their strategy. You make them explain themselves. And explanations always look weaker than observations. Here's where most people make a crucial mistake. They think that once they've deflected the initial attack, the game is over. But Machiavelli knew that humiliation attempts are rarely isolated incidents. They're tests, and how you handle the first test determines whether there will be a second one. The person who tried to humiliate you is now watching to see what you do next. Do you avoid them? Do you seem angry? Do you try to get revenge? Do you complain to others about what happened? All of these responses tell them that their attack was successful, even if you handled it well in the moment. They hurt you enough to change your behavior, and that's all they really wanted. So what's the Machiavellian move? You act like nothing happened. You don't avoid the person. You don't seek revenge. You don't complain to others. You treat them exactly the same way you did before, with one subtle difference. You're now slightly less available to them. Not obviously cold, just marginally less warm. Not rude, just a little more distant. Not hostile, just a touch more formal. This controlled withdrawal is more unsettling than any retaliation could be, because they can't point to anything you're doing wrong. You're still polite. You still interact when necessary. But something has changed, and they can feel it. The easy access they once had to your attention, your energy, your engagement that's been quietly reduced. and that reduction haunts them more than anger would. They start to wonder if you're planning something. They question whether they've made an enemy. They worry about what you might do next. And in that worry, that uncertainty, that's where your power grows. Not through action, but through the threat of action. Not through retaliation, but through the possibility of retaliation. Machiavelli understood that the most powerful weapon isn't the one you use. It's the one people know you have, but can't predict when you'll deploy it. When you respond to humiliation with controlled calm followed by strategic distance, you create exactly that dynamic. You become unreadable, and unreadable people are dangerous people. But there's another layer to this that most people miss. The person who tries to humiliate you in public isn't just attacking you. They're teaching everyone else how they think you should be treated. They're setting a precedent. They're giving others permission to disrespect you. And if you don't correct this dynamic immediately, it spreads. That's why your response matters so much. It's not just about defending yourself in that moment. It's about establishing your boundaries for everyone who's watching. It's about sending a clear message. This person misjudged me, and anyone else who makes the same mistake will get the same treatment. When you respond to humiliation with cold intelligence instead of hot emotion, you create a reputation for being dangerous to underestimate. People start to think twice before testing you. They wonder if their joke will backfire. They question whether their insult will make them look stupid. And in that hesitation, that doubt, that's where your influence begins. The final piece of the Machiavellian response to humiliation is patience. You don't rush to prove that you're unaffected. You don't immediately try to regain your social standing. You don't work overtime to repair your image. Instead, you let time do the work for you. Because the person who tried to humiliate you will inevitably reveal more about their character through their continued behavior. And the crowd will eventually see the pattern. Maybe they attack someone else. Maybe they get too comfortable and say something truly inappropriate. Maybe they reveal the insecurity that drives their need to tear others down. Whatever it is, their true nature will surface. And when it does, people will remember how you handled their attack. They'll realize that you saw something they missed. They'll understand that your calm response wasn't weakness, it was wisdom. That's the long game Machiavelli always played. He never needed immediate vindication because he knew that truth has a way of surfacing eventually. The person who humiliates others publicly is revealing something about themselves, and that revelation becomes their own destruction. You don't need to destroy them. You just need to step aside and let them destroy themselves. Remember this. Humiliation only works on people who need external validation to feel whole. But when you've learned to validate yourself, when you've accepted that not everyone will like or respect you, when you've made peace with being misunderstood, you become immune to this particular weapon. And that immunity, that emotional independence, that's what makes you truly powerful. Because the person who can't be humiliated can't be controlled. And the person who can't be controlled can't be defeated. Not by words, not by shame, not by the opinions of people who mistake cruelty for strength. You become untouchable not because nothing hits you, but because nothing that hits you can make you fall. That's the Machiavellian way. Not to avoid the battle, but to win it so decisively that no one dares to challenge you again. And sometimes, the most decisive victory is the one where you never even acknowledge that a battle was fought. You simply stand there, unmoved, unshaken, untouchable, while your attacker exhausts themselves against your indifference. And in that moment, everyone understands who has the real power.